Hello YouTube, welcome back to today's Noob Tip of the Day, all about education. This is particularly important when you start getting the symbols of not enough educated workers or not enough workers in your city. And it usually starts, I want to say around, we'll say 10,000, maybe as low as 6,000-ish population. Because at that point, your light density commercial starting to level up, and as the commercial starts leveling up, it requires more and more higher educated folks to be employed, and hopefully you're building a really nice city that's encouraging your buildings to level up. But at that point as well, your city hasn't matured enough to get enough people through the education system to fill those positions. So there's a little bit of a kind of, I will say, you're in a pickle. You're a little bit in a bind in the very beginning of the game. You'll get to a point, like I said, where your commercial area will start leveling up, requiring some higher and highly educated, so well-educated and highly educated workers. But your city hasn't kind of gone through the education, like I said, the citizens haven't gone through the education system to kind of fulfill those jobs. So first we'll go over kind of how and where to place schools, and how many schools to put down, and kind of when to start putting them down, when to ignore those symbols and just let them ride and let them go abandoned, and they'll come back and it's okay, and what policies to use and kind of when to enact them, and kind of what numbers to look at to know, okay, now is a good time to maybe implement Industries 4.0 policy and how to implement that without destroying your industry, as well as when is a good time to implement the education boost policy if you want to have high level buildings, high land value in your city, and how to basically never have to use policies like schools out, create like some folks call like slum districts to give your industry area, employees. I never build any of that. I never use those policies. So I'll kind of show you the way I do it, and maybe it'll help you in your cities. So let's get started. So first, let's talk about the schools. Elementary, high school, campuses, colleges. You don't want to use the green to kind of show where, we're on health, so it doesn't even help you. So there we go. You don't want to use the green to necessarily show you where you put your schools. You want to use the capacity and eligibility. So you see when you click on like a school, it gives you this nice kind of menu up at the left side, and it's got a bar, and you want it to basically be in the yellow or green. And the green is good. It means you have enough capacity. So I have 3,500 student capacity for my 2773 eligible students. Use that to kind of give you an idea of how many schools to put down. And you want to put your schools in your residential areas. So this kind of gets into how you should zone your city. There's many ways to do it. You can mix it all up, which I've seen advocated. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm more of a fan of creating residential neighborhoods and like kind of commercial areas down like say Main Street in this area, or residential, neighborhoods over here and over here. A little bit of light commercial's fine. Kind of give them a little corner store in the neighborhood, but your high density and your kind of your major commercial areas should be separated here. And this allows you, once again, to kind of put your schools where your people are, because schools are usually in the real world. They're not like in the commercial area. So you don't have like a strip mall and then a high school next to like a mall, right? You have like the high schools in your neighborhood, because that's where people are. So put your so put your schools like that. So like I said, I got an elementary school in here, elementary schools in here and here. In here, and of course the higher the density. So if you do a big area of high density, you're going to put the schools a little closer together, because this is all high density. Light density, which is mostly this area, because this is the first area, you're not going to have quite as many schools. You're going to put down about 2 elementary schools for every high school, roughly, and it makes sense, right? Because this is, I think the capacity on these are like 250. We'll say 300. These are like 1,000 maybe. Yeah, so it's roughly 2 to 1. They have about twice as much coverage area, a little bit more. And then your campuses and universities, you can probably get away with maybe 1 or 2 in your whole entire city. Bring mass transit to it so folks can get there real easily, and you won't have any problems with people attending your universities. If you're using the campus DLC, you do not want to put down any of the base game campuses. So this university here, if you have these two, which is what I have in my city. I have the campus DLC. The reason you don't want to do that is because they'll steal students away from your campus DLC campus, and then you will have difficulty leveling up to 5 stars prestigious, where once you're up to level 5, you make the most money. It tells you, and you're somewhere. Or maybe it might be here. Yeah, I think it's in here. Basic info. Your tuition fees, $21 a student, and it gives you like the biggest exchange student bonus, we'll say. That way you can have a campus like this that's making $60,000 a week and costing you like 20, so you're making $40,000 a week. So you don't want to, like I said, have the base university competing with your campus DLC. So that's campuses. So now, when to know when to turn certain policies on and kind of how to implement them. So I would say, depending on how quickly you're building your city and kind of like the techniques you're using, if you're kind of going like progressively with the milestones, so you're kind of playing the game, I'll say normally it's not unlimited milestones and not milestones unlocked and unlimited money. It could be unlimited money, of course, but the milestones you're still locked, so you're kind of going through and through. When you first get your elementary school, you can probably put it down. You'll probably have about the number of folks you need. Maybe half. I would say start putting your schools down in the beginning when you have about half of the demand for it. So when you look, just click in this menu, or if you go into the info views and you go to education when you first start and you first unlock elementary school, look, see who's eligible. If you have like 2 students eligible, you don't need to put down a school because they're not eligible. You will for the elementary, since it's the first level. So you'll probably have to put this down right away. But with the high school, once that unlocks, you'll have no one available for high school. You might have a couple hundred. You can let it kind of roll a little bit, maybe until you get about to 500, 300, 400, something in there. Then go ahead. At that point, you've probably built out enough neighborhood where you could put down a high school. And the same thing for university. You don't have to slam that down as soon as you get it either. I mean, you can, of course, but you just won't have that many people eligible for it. So you're going to be kind of spending a little bit of money when you don't really need to, if you're having trouble with money. Once you get to a point, unless I guess we should stay in here. When you get to a point where that pie chart, which says graduated citizens, is roughly, we'll say 10% or so uneducated. We'll say around anywhere between 30 and 40% educated, 30-ish% well-educated, 20 to 25% highly educated. That's when you want to consider switching to Industries 4.0. I would say once you put down your first school, your first university school, I should say, and that's been running for, and at those numbers as well, that's when you also want to implement education boost. So at the beginning, when you first put down all 3 school types, probably good to leave education boost off just for a little bit, because you don't want to shock your industry. If you do that, if you put education boost on, you'll dry up all the uneducated workers, and your industry is going to start screaming for jobs. Now your commercial area at this point will probably already be screaming for highly educated workers, the blue guys. Just ignore them. If they go abandoned, they go abandoned. Then when they repopulate, they'll come back as a level 1 building, which will then not require the highly educated worker. They'll kind of work their way through the ranks again. And then again, at that point, by the time they get to the, say, level 3, the second time around, or maybe the third time around, you'll be kind of prepared to fill those spots. Hopefully that makes sense. So don't panic. You'll only have a few. It shouldn't be your whole entire, commercial area. It'll just be a handful of buildings here and there that'll go. And you can just kind of like let them ride. It's fine. It's not going to hurt your city too bad. You just let it go. Like I said, once you start seeing maybe 10 or so % uneducated, we'll say a large chunk of educated, so folks have kind of worked their way through the elementary school process. And you got a good amount of well-educated folks, maybe not as many highly educated folks. They've kind of gone through elementary, they got through the high school, and they're working through college. At that point, it's time to go ahead and go into policies here and turn on education boost. That's going to force a lot more people to go to school, which is what you want, because educated citizens level up buildings, high level buildings drive, boost your land value, which increases your tax revenue. They reduce tax consumption, all that stuff, electricity consumption. And you can read the stats. So that's what you want in your city. You want your city to be well educated. At that point, once you turn the education boost on, depending on how big your industry is, you may wait like a year or two through the city until once again you start seeing these numbers where now your highly educated is getting into the 20s, we'll say. At that point, you want to think about turning Industry 4.0 policy on. Depending on where you are in the progress of your city, your industry could be pretty small still, so you can go ahead and just do it. And just realize you're going to have to ride the wave. Your industry is going to go abandoned because they're set up for uneducated workers, and then the new basically buildings, we'll say, may come in. They may or may not go abandoned, but you may see a large abandonment. And then they'll restructure themselves so that they can basically support the highly educated folks and the well-educated folks. Kind of like what I have in here. Right. And you can have overeducated workers. At this point, you're going to see. And then more and more overeducated workers, and that's totally fine too. If your industry area is large, so if it's more than, let's say, this is what, 4 blocks, we'll say, roughly. If it's that big, you can just do it citywide. If you have this industry here, and say maybe like an industry area over here, and maybe even like some more industry over here, you may want to do something like this. Zone out an area, zone like a district over it. So say your industry was like this big. Let's go ahead and we can just make a whole new district. Say you had a whole industry area and it was filling up like all these tiles. Maybe you want to do something like this. Just zone this out like this. Leave it alone. Or go into here first. Click on here and do the individual policy. And put on, I think it's over here, Industry 4.0. And then that way, half your industry, or maybe a quarter of your industry, kind of goes through the turmoil first. Let them kind of settle out. Once they make the break, if you had like a third one, you could just extend this. Push it over. The next block. Let the next block kind of go through its wave of change. And then once you kind of get to the 4th one, you could just maybe delete the whole thing. Pause the game, delete the whole thing, and then go ahead and make it a citywide policy in here. Sorry, it's over here. Boom, turn on. And then at that point, you'll be fine. Once your industry kind of goes through the paces, you'll be totally fine. So I hope that's helpful. You may experience some worker issues later on in the game when you kind of build out 8 or 9 tiles. And that is more so driven by the fact that your commercial, I should say your commercial and really industry, might be far away from your citizens. So it just might take time for them to get there. So if you were over here building some stuff out and you zone some like commercial, or you zone, some high density commercial in here, and you started seeing some like some worker symbols, just let it go. Let it go, let them go abandoned. And then they'll come back. And see, whether they come back and they fine. If they do come back and fine, then you're good. If they keep going abandoned, then you have to find out what the root of the cause is. It's probably something else, not your education. It could be something different. Make sure you have good transit. Make sure you have good connections to get to that area. I think that's it. So I hope this was helpful with your education. How to place you can put, I should make a note, you can put education buildings in commercial areas, and it kind of makes them happy. But like I said, so if you don't have a spot to put them in your residential areas, that's kind of an alternative. But generally, you want to put your education buildings in your residential neighborhoods. You can run bus routes to them to scoop up, just like they do in the real world, right? They have bus routes for kids to scoop them up, bring them to school. Do that, you'll be fine. And place it, like I said, based on eligibility versus capacity, not by the green that you see on the ground. And that's it. Thank you very much. I hope it was helpful. Have a great day, and as always, happy building.